For nearly 200 years, the global economy ran on a simple promise that every dollar, every pound, and every franc was backed by a physical piece of gold sitting in a vault. This was the gold standard, an era often remembered as a time of stability, honesty, and real money. The story we're told is that it was a natural system that governments abandoned out of greed, ushering in our modern age of endless money printing and inflation. But that story is a myth. The gold standard wasn't natural, it wasn't automatic, and it wasn't honest. Its history is the story of an accidental discovery, a carefully managed illusion, and a catastrophic failure that caused the Great Depression. This is The Lore of Money. We explore how money shapes history, power, and society. Subscribe for more. Before we trace the evolution of the gold standard, you need to understand why monetary systems change at all. Systems don't evolve randomly. They change when they can no longer finance a war, when they can't solve a crippling economic crisis, or when the balance of global power shifts so dramatically that the old rules no longer apply. These systems are not forces of nature. They are man-made constructs, tools designed to serve the interests of the powerful. Every transition from one system to another follows a pattern. The old system comes under a pressure it cannot handle, it breaks, and in the chaos that follows, a new system is built from the wreckage, designed to solve the last crisis, but containing the seeds of the next one. Let's start at the beginning, with an accident caused by one of the greatest scientists in history. Our story begins not with a grand design, but with a simple mistake made by Sir Isaac Newton. In the early 1700s, Newton wasn't just the father of physics, he was also the master of the mint in England. At the time, Britain was on a bimetallic standard, meaning its money was based on both gold and silver. But the system was failing. The nation's silver coins were vanishing from circulation. People were hoarding them, melting them down, or shipping them to Asia where silver was worth more. The government tasked Newton with figuring out why and fixing the problem. Newton produced a detailed report in 1717. He correctly identified the cause. Britain's official mint ratio was wrong. The government was legally overvaluing gold coins and undervaluing silver coins compared to the prices on the European continent. This created a perfect opportunity for arbitrage. A merchant could take £1,000 worth of silver coins from Britain, sell them in France for gold, bring that gold back to Britain, and legally exchange it for more than £1,000 worth of silver, making a risk-free profit. This dynamic is explained by Gresham's law, which states that bad money drives out good. The good money, the undervalued silver coins, was driven out of circulation because it was worth more as a lump of metal than as a coin. The bad money, the overvalued gold coins, was all that was left. Newton's proposed solution was to revalue the main gold coin, the guinea. His own calculations showed it was worth about 20 shillings and 8 pence in silver, but he recommended reducing its value only to 21 shillings. He knowingly, or through a massive miscalculation, left gold still slightly overvalued. This small error made the problem permanent. Silver completely disappeared, and Britain, by total accident, found itself on a de facto gold standard. This accident placed the world's rising financial and military power on a gold-based system, setting the stage for the rest of the world to eventually follow. For the next century and a half, Britain's accidental gold standard was mostly a local affair. The global system didn't truly begin until a single pivotal event in 1871. The newly unified German Empire, fresh off a victory in the Franco-Prussian War, decided to join the gold standard. They funded this move with a massive war indemnity paid by France in gold. Germany's decision to join Britain as a major industrial power on a gold standard created a tipping point. Suddenly, every other major nation felt pressure to join what was becoming the Gold Club. The reasons were simple: network effects and power. Adhering to the standard created a global system of fixed exchange rates. This made international trade and investment incredibly predictable and far less risky. If you were a merchant in New York, you knew exactly how many dollars a British pound would be worth next month or next year. This facilitated a massive boom in globalization. But the motivation was also political. Joining the Gold Club was a signal of credibility. London was the undisputed financial center of the world. To access its deep and liquid capital markets, to be seen as a modern and trustworthy nation, you had to adopt Britain's monetary system. This ideology was so powerful that it even overrode fierce domestic political opposition in countries like the United States, which had a powerful free silver movement. In 1900, the U.S. finally passed the Gold Standard Act, officially joining the club and cementing its status as a rising global power. This era, from about 1870 to 1914, is known as the classical gold standard. It's the period people remember as stable and automatic. But its automatic nature was a complete myth. The system was supposedly self-correcting through something called the price-specie flow mechanism. If a country ran a trade deficit, gold would flow out. Its money supply would shrink, prices would fall, and its exports would become competitive again, automatically fixing the imbalance. In reality, this almost never happened. The system wasn't automatic, it was managed. And the manager was the Bank of England. It used its influence and power to ensure the system remained stable, but always in a way that benefited the British Empire. The classical gold standard worked not because of a magical economic law, but because there was a single, undisputed hegemon willing and able to manage it in a time of relative peace and cooperation between nations. That peace was about to end, and with it, the entire system. The classical era came to a sudden and violent end in August 1914 with the outbreak of World War I. The gold standard and total war were completely incompatible. Governments needed to finance their massive war efforts, and they couldn't do it with the limited amount of gold in their vaults. They needed to print money, and to do that, they had to break the link between their currency and gold. One by one, every belligerent nation in Europe suspended convertibility. The golden fetters, as they were called, were the first casualty of the war. But critically, everyone believed this was a temporary emergency measure. The universal assumption among policymakers was that as soon as the war was over, they would restore the gold standard at the exact same pre-war parities. This belief, this ideological hangover from a world that no longer existed, was the single greatest policy error of the 20th century. Policymakers were obsessed with restoring the symbol of pre-war stability, the fixed exchange rate, but they failed to understand that the substance of that stability was gone forever. The pre-war system had worked because of British hegemony, political cooperation, and flexible wages and prices. All of that was destroyed in the trenches of the Western Front. Britain was now a debtor nation. Cooperation was replaced by bitter resentment, and economies were rigid and politically charged. The most catastrophic example of this folly was Britain's decision in 1925, championed by Winston Churchill, to return the pound to the gold standard at its pre-war parity of $4.86. This completely ignored the massive inflation the war had caused. The market value of the pound was far lower. By pegging it 10% higher, Churchill instantly made all British exports more expensive, crippling the nation's industry. To compete, British companies had to slash wages, leading to mass unemployment and the 1926 general strike. But the damage wasn't just domestic. To help the struggling British pound, the U.S. Federal Reserve was pressured to keep American interest rates low. This flood of cheap money in the United States fueled the speculative frenzy of the Roaring Twenties and inflated the massive stock market bubble that finally burst in October 1929. The flawed attempt to resurrect a dead system didn't bring back the old stability. It sowed the seeds of the Great Depression. While the 1929 stock market crash was the spark, it was the interwar gold standard that acted as the engine, turning a normal recession into a decade-long global catastrophe. There is a near-universal consensus among economic historians that the gold standard itself was the leading cause of the Great Depression. This is known as the Golden Fetters thesis. The system acted as a global transmission mechanism, spreading the American downturn to the rest of the world, and more importantly, handcuffing policymakers, preventing them from doing anything to fight the crisis. The first problem was a severe deflationary bias built into the system. The rules of the game required countries losing gold to deflate their economies. But countries gaining gold, like the United States and France, were supposed to inflate. They refused. They sterilized the gold inflows, hoarding the metal to prevent their own prices from rising. This created a one-way deflationary ratchet. The entire burden of adjustment fell on the weakest countries, forcing them into a death spiral of falling prices and rising unemployment, while the strongest countries offered no relief. The gold standard became a global machine for exporting deflation. The second problem was the fetters it placed on monetary policy. As the Depression worsened and banks began to fail, people rushed to convert their paper money into gold. This massive drain on reserves put central banks in an impossible position. To defend their currencies pegged to gold, they were forced to do the exact opposite of what was needed. In the middle of a catastrophic depression, they had to raise interest rates to stop the gold from flowing out. This pro-cyclical policy was economic suicide, but the rules of the gold standard demanded it. It prevented central banks from acting as a lender of last resort and flooding the banking system with the liquidity it desperately needed to survive. The final fetter was ideological. Policymakers were trapped in a mentality that viewed the gold standard as sacred and devaluation as a sign of national failure. They genuinely believed the depression was a necessary, painful purge that would cleanse the system of bad investments. This dangerous ideology paralyzed them, leading them to double down on the very policies that were destroying their economies. The only way to escape the Great Depression was to break the fetters. In 1931, the dam finally broke when Great Britain, facing a complete collapse, was forced to abandon the gold standard. The United States followed 2 years later. In March 1933, one of President Franklin Roosevelt's first acts was to declare a national bank holiday, suspend gold convertibility, and effectively take America off the gold standard. Roosevelt then actively used devaluation as a tool for recovery. He raised the official price of gold from about $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce. This was a massive monetary stimulus, allowing the Federal Reserve to finally expand the money supply and fight deflation. The historical evidence is clear. The timing of recovery from the Great Depression corresponds directly to when a country abandoned the gold standard. Countries that left earlier recovered faster. Breaking the fetters was the absolute precondition for economic survival. After the devastation of World War II, the Allied nations met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new monetary system. They recognized the fatal flaws of the classical standard and knew a simple return was impossible. Instead, they created a clever but ultimately doomed hybrid system. The US dollar, backed by America's enormous gold reserves, would be the new anchor. The United States promised to redeem dollars for gold at a fixed price of $35 an ounce, but only for foreign central banks. All other currencies were then pegged to the dollar. It was a gold dollar standard, designed to provide the stability of fixed exchange rates without the suicidal rigidity of the old system. But this new system had a fatal contradiction built into its very core, a problem identified by the economist Robert Triffin in 1960. The Triffin dilemma stated that the system's success would be the cause of its failure. For the global economy to grow, it needed more US dollars to finance trade. To supply those dollars, the United States had to run persistent trade deficits. But as these deficits grew, the number of dollars held by foreign countries would eventually exceed America's stock of gold, destroying confidence in the promise to redeem them. The U.S. was trapped. To provide the world with liquidity, it had to run deficits that guaranteed the system's eventual collapse. 3 times in its history, the gold standard proved it was incompatible with modern demands. It was accidentally created by a mathematical error, it was shattered by the financial needs of total war, and its flawed restoration caused the Great Depression. Each time, policymakers believed the old system was bedrock, the only source of stability and credibility. They were wrong every single time. So what's the next transformation? The modern fiat system, where central banks manage currencies with no physical backing, has itself created new pressures. Soaring government debt, the constant temptation of inflationary finance, and the emergence of new technologies like Bitcoin all challenge the post-1971 consensus. Maybe the future is a return to some kind of commodity anchor, or maybe it's a fully digital, decentralized currency. But one thing history makes clear is that the system we have now will not last forever, because nothing ever does. The question isn't whether money will evolve again, but whether you will understand the change before it happens, or only after it's too late. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.